to go to law school was that I was in college in the 60s and 70s when there was a lot of campus unrest, a lot of political activity with regard to civil rights, primarily with African American communities, but also that was starting to spill over into women's lib, as they called it back then. I knew I wanted to work. I knew I didn't want to be a teacher, or nurse, which my parents had always told me I should be. So I was really just looking around for what I could do. I didn't have any specific ideas about wanting to be a lawyer. Law school was a school I knew I could get into. I knew I wouldn't have to write a dissertation. I knew I wouldn't have to be in the education field, so I thought I would give it a try. It seemed like a good way to effectuate social change. That was part of it. When I say there was no drive to go to law school, I should add that there was a push to go to law school. That was from the Dean of Women at the University of Kansas. She was an incredible force in the lives of a lot of us who were on campus at that time. And I was within a small group of students that she had taken a particular interest in for some reason from the very beginning. And I think there was a tacit assumption that we were not getting out of KU without a plan forward for our entire lives. And so she didn't have a vested interest in whether it was law school or computer science, but we needed a plan, so I had a plan. Before I started law school, when I was a senior in college, I took a class, criminal law, at the law school. I thought it would be interesting and give me a taste of whether it's something I might enjoy. So I met people there that were very friendly and accepting of me. They thought it was a curiosity, that a woman would be interested in taking criminal law as an undergraduate. When I actually got to law school, I don't remember being excited. I remember being terrified by some of the professors. A lot of the issues at that time seem pretty prosaic now, I'm sure, but women were the butt of jokes and comments that professors would make. Women were treated differently in class when they were called on. We were such a small minority that we didn't really feel like we had any kind of critical mass or ability to complain about how we were being treated. So I think there was just a lot of tentativeness about how do we find our way in this environment. The faculty at the law school, for the most part, I have nothing but fabulous things to say about them. And they certainly gave me an education that's been transformational in my life. So if anybody's going to bash law professors in the 70s, it's not going to be me. But a lot of them were older, they didn't have experience of dealing with any kind of minorities or diversity in their classes. They would make comments that they didn't intend to be hurtful, but they also didn't understand how comments might be misunderstood by people who came from a different background. We were often associated in the same class as the law wives, and so, we weren't respected as being students so much as just auxiliary, to the main business of educating the lawyers of tomorrow. Most of the professors, if you're here, you do the work just like everybody else does. We don't cut you any slack, you don't cut us any slack. And the women in my class were outstanding students. We were disproportionately represented in the top of the law school class. That's why it was hard when we realized we couldn't get jobs in the private sector the way our classmates were. When I entered private practice, I was in a law firm that was about 45 people. And at that time, it was one of the largest law firms in Kansas City, Missouri. It was very prestigious blue ribbon type of law firm. I was the second woman there, and the first woman had arrived just the year before me. This is a firm that claims to be the oldest continuous law firm west of the Mississippi River. So they had a very long, proud history, a lot of Ivy League graduates and that sort of thing. One of their partners, for decades, had said that he would blackball any woman that was presented as a possible employment candidate. And so they never had any women as long as he's a voting member of the partnership. So he had just retired, they had their first woman, I'm their second. And even though that partner was probably the only one to be brash enough to actually spell out his position, I think there was a lot of underground sentiment that, okay, we have to take women because the market demands that we take women. There was a lot of hiring going on, and they needed to have manpower, woman power, but it wasn't their first choice. I did not enjoy very much about being in the courtroom. For one thing, I was always there in the second capacity, the second chair capacity, and that part was fine, but when it came time in my career for me to step up and do more things on my own, the lawyers that I worked with were very anxious about letting women have responsibility in the courtroom. And so you take the normal stress of trying to represent a client, trying to impress a judge, trying to do everything you can, to win people over to your side, and you've got somebody pulling on your skirt and whispering in your ear and distracting you all the time. So it was stressful. I learned so much from the lawyers at that firm and from the opportunity to be in private practice and to practice at a very high level that pushed me way out of my comfort zone. So when I talk about the anxieties and being second guessed and held to a higher standard and being under incredible scrutiny that other people weren't under, that's background, but that's not the main point. A lot of people who clerk for trial judges sort of get bit by a bug when they're working, because you're, number one, at a very impressionable stage of your career, and then you have a chance to sit at the knee of somebody who's really accomplished in the profession, and you see not only the drama and interest of what goes on in a trial court, but you sit at the feet of somebody who really knows that world and who's a master and can teach you things that lawyers outside the courts never get a chance to see. So I think all of us have a little bit of daydream instilled, the impossible dream instilled in us that, wow, if that opportunity ever comes along, I'm going to grab that because being a trial judge would be the best thing there is. And I definitely had that. I never thought that would be a feasible dream for me. I didn't know any career path that would take me from private practice to being, especially a federal judge. So it was just something in the back of my mind for a really long time. When Judge O'Connor decided that he was going to take senior status, so I knew there was going to be an opening. I thought I was too young, I thought I was too experienced, and I probably was, or too inexperienced, and I probably was both of those things, but I knew there would not be another opportunity like this for maybe my lifetime. So I just, after a lot of soul searching, said, okay, it's now or never. I'm going to see if I can make this work. There are a couple highlights of the confirmation process that I will never forget. One was the day Senator Dole called me and he said, we would like you to be considered for a federal district judgeship. We're going to have interviews at the Justice Department in Washington, D.C. next week for you and 3 other people, and if you're interested, be there. So that was the first thing I remember. Then there was another call a couple months later where Senator Dole called, and he said that he was happy to tell me that the president would like to nominate me for this position. Then there was a very memorable telephone call from President Bush, and this was actually hilarious because back then the president would actually call each nominee personally to say, would you mind, I would like to ask you to serve your country, would you be willing to do that for me? So the president doesn't just apparently pick up the phone call and call your office. There's a whole group of telephone schedulers, so they called and they said, well, the president would like to talk with you next week on Tuesday morning. So I said, fine, I will be in Jackson Hole at the 10th Circuit Judicial Conference, and here's the number where he can reach me. So that, obviously you're in a meeting and you change rooms like every hour, and they said, that's no problem, we'll track you down, you just need to let the front desk know where we can get a hold of you. This is before cell phones, right? So every time I left one meeting room and went to another, I had to go to the front desk and say, excuse me, but President Bush may be calling me, and if he does, you should know that I am in the green spruce room. And so this went on for days because he never was able to call at the time they said. And pretty soon the people at the front desk, they'd see me coming in, you'd sort of see them reach under the desk for their panic button, like here's that crazy, paranoid, delusional woman who thinks she's going to be contacted by the president any moment. And when the call finally did come, we were at a break. They had just let us out for lunch. So they rang this call into a convention hall, and I'm trying to stand there and talk to him. There's like 400 people milling around. I remember that. And there was another call from the president from Air Force One, which was very exciting. So I remember all those things very well. Towards the end of the confirmation process, things started happening so fast. It was hard to think much about the actual job. It was just, okay, let's think about the confirmation hearing. Let's think about being voted out on the floor of the Senate. Let's think about getting sworn in and planning that ceremony and where will my office be and that sort of thing. But it was in the fall of 1992, and that was a presidential election year. So President Bush was dropping in the polls, President Clinton was soaring, and in the fall it was clear that there was going to be a change of administrations. So President Bush had nominated 67 people for different district judge positions. All of us were waiting for a Senate confirmation hearing, and we were running out of time. The Senate Judiciary Committee had stopped scheduling those hearings, and so it was clear that all or most of us were not going to get confirmed. After all we've been through, it was going to be a dead letter. So in late September, the Senate Judiciary Committee decided to set one more hearing. They put 6 judges in there, and I was not one of the 6, but when Senator Dole found out that there's going to be a hearing and I wasn't in the list, he did whatever people like that do to advance their nominee's nomination. So they were able to, they took some people off the list and they added a couple more, and I got a call from Senator Dole at like 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. Said, your hearing's tomorrow, there's a flight out of Kansas City at 5 o'clock, be on it, and you need to be in the Justice Department at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
After I got the call from Senator Dole, so I was at my office. I called my parents and I said, find my children, and if there's time to bring them to the airport, to put them on a flight with me, I would love for them to go. I went home and packed a suitcase and went straight back to the airport, made the flight, as did all the kids in their soccer uniforms and other things. So we made it to Washington, D.C. We spent the night in the hotel. The next day, we had a very short meeting at the Justice Department to prep us for the interviews. The confirmation hearing itself was so different than the contentious hearings that they have now. They told us accurately that there would be one senator there from each party, that we would get 4 questions from each side. They told us what the questions would be, and we talked about what our answers would be, and they pushed us into the hearing. When I got there, Senator Biden opened the committee hearing by saying he doubted that any of us would be confirmed. He hoped that none of our senators had led us to believe otherwise, but that it was very late in the election year, and thank you for coming. So that was cold water that none of us had been expecting to have thrown in our faces. At the end, we did all get confirmed about a week later, but it was nail-biting time for all of us. This court is an incredibly welcoming place to be. I think it was especially so for me because I had started here as a law clerk. Many of the people that I worked with from the 70s still worked here in the early 90s. I obviously had an opportunity to now come back and work with Judge O'Connor as my colleague instead of my boss and my mentor. That paved a lot of highway for me in terms of goodwill and people giving me the benefit of the doubt and just being excited. I was the first woman. That meant a lot to a lot of people. To me, being the first woman meant that I had a lot to lose. It was like mine to lose. It was a really precious gift that I had received, an opportunity to serve in that way, but that I had a huge responsibility to discharge my responsibilities in a way that would make people proud and make it easier for the people who came after me, not just as judges, but in court administration and lawyers, and everybody is looking to the first person to know how to act. My hope for the legal profession would be that people in the future can find more happiness and fulfillment in what they're doing than they seem to do now. I think the law is an incredibly honorable, valuable, challenging profession, and it's been so important to so much of what our country represents in terms of equality and opportunity and so forth. So I would hate to see the best people and the brightest people leave our profession because they don't think it works for their values as a person.